We're going to go through a transaction that involves selling shares to one or more buyers. Now that the company has issued shares of stock to owners, the owners can trade their shares. Let's say that George Wilson wants to sell his 1,000 shares to Tellers Trust, which is in the group owners list. We start by selecting the company that is being traded, then open the Enter Transactions form and select the type of ownership. Select the individual owner option, then select George Wilson. All of the certificates owned by George appear in the list. We need to identify which certificate is being traded and will be surrendered to the company so that a new certificate can be issued to the new owners. So we'll select the first certificate representing 1,000 shares. Notice that the number of selected shares indicates 1,000. The amount remaining to assign in the transaction is also 1,000. Now we identify the buyers in this transaction and the details for the buyer. Tellers Trust purchased the entire 1,000 shares. So we can enter the number of shares, the amount paid, as well as any non-monetary value traded. We can change the certificate number and make any notes that are appropriate. After reviewing the information, press the Add button, and the information appears in the list at the bottom of the form. Just as before, you can delete the entry by selecting it, then pressing the Delete button, or pressing the Cancel and Close Form button. If the information is correct, press the Create Transactions button. Notice that the form is not letting us leave until the date of the transaction and the date of transfer are entered. It automatically puts today's date in the text boxes, but you can change that before leaving the form. Let's leave the dates as is and press Create Transactions again to leave the form and save the transaction to the database. Okay, that was an example of a simple trade. Now let's say that there's more than one buyer in the transaction. Let's say that Teller Trust is trading their 1,000 shares with 5 buyers, one who is buying 500 shares, one who is buying 200 shares, and 3 others, each who are buying 100 shares. Start by selecting the company, then open the Enter Transactions form and select the type of ownership. Select the type of seller and select the seller's name from the pull-down list. Now select the certificate that is being traded. Move to the buyer side of the transaction in the lower half of the form and complete the information for the first buyer. Barry Hill is buying 500 shares, so we select his name, enter the amount paid, and other information is needed, and enter 500 in the shares or units text box. Notice that when we enter 500 shares, the amount remaining to assign in transaction changes to 500. Now select Terry Wilson, who is buying 200 shares, and fill in the information for that certificate. Now the amount remaining to assign changes to 300. You won't be able to leave this form until the amount remaining to assign is 0. The additional information is rapidly entered for each of the 3 100-share trades, and the amount remaining to assign changes to 0. Look over the data in the list at the bottom of the form to be sure that it's accurate, and delete and re-enter anything that's not correct. Once satisfied that the information is correct, press the Create Transactions button. Another type of transaction involves multiple sellers trading multiple certificates to one buyer, creating only one certificate for the buyer. The sellers must be a group, selling one or more certificates to one buyer. If the sellers are not already in the group owner form, return to the group owner form and list the individuals as a group. Then transactions need to be created transferring ownership of each of the certificates owned by individuals to the group. The certificate number can be left blank, but it's better to assign an out-of-sequence certificate number to those transactions. Once the group is shown to own all of the certificates in the transaction, the group can be selected, and each of the certificates are selected, and a single buyer can be selected. Enter the rest of the information, and when you're sure that the transaction is accurate, press the Create Transactions button. Multiple sellers selling to multiple buyers can be done in the same way. Just select the individual buyers and indicate the number of shares that they're purchasing. The last type of transaction involves the company repurchasing its own stock. Once it has been repurchased, it's called treasury stock. The same process is followed as for other transactions, but the buyback button is selected instead of an individual buyer. The number of shares outstanding is reduced by the number of treasury shares. This is because the stock is no longer being held outside of the company. This concludes the tutorial for entering owner transactions.